What if I told you there is a religious organization with more money than some countries? We're not talking about a few $1 million in a collection plate. We are talking about $293 billion. That is more than the annual GDP of New Zealand. That is enough money to buy every single NBA team twice over and still have billions left over. This is the financial empire of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on one of the most secretive and wealthiest organizations on the planet. We will answer 3 questions. Where did this money come from? Where is it all invested? And why is it so controversial? Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The number. $293 billion. Let's start with the number itself. As of the end of 2024, independent analysts estimated the total net worth of the Mormon Church at approximately $293 billion. To put that in perspective, that is more than the net worth of many Fortune 500 companies. And here is the crazy part. That number grew by $28 billion in a single year. That's $28 billion added to their wealth in just 12 months, largely driven by investment returns. The church's investment portfolio alone is estimated to be worth around $206 billion. That's managed through a combination of their in-house investment arm, Ensign Peak Advisors, and a network of third-party funds. But here is what makes this truly remarkable. The church does not publicly disclose its finances. Unlike publicly traded companies or even the Catholic Church in some countries, the Mormon Church operates with very little financial transparency. All of these numbers come from independent researchers who piece together public records, SEC filings, and property records to estimate the true scale of this empire. The leading organization doing this research is called the Widow's Mite Report. They have been tracking the church's finances for years, and their estimates are considered the gold standard in this space. Chapter 2. Where does the money come from? So, how did a church with 17.5 million members build a $293 billion empire? The answer starts with a simple practice called tithing, the Tithing Engine. Mormons are required to pay 10% of their gross income to the church. This is not optional if you want to be a fully active member in good standing. Without paying a full tithe, you cannot enter the temple. And without temple ordinances, you cannot achieve the highest level of salvation in Mormon theology. The numbers are staggering. In 2024 alone, the church received an estimated $8 billion in tithes and offerings. Other estimates put annual tithing income at around $6 billion. And remember, this is just from members. Over the past 2 centuries, this steady stream of income has allowed the church to build an investment portfolio that generated an estimated $24.5 billion in profits in 2023 alone. So tithing is the engine. But that is just the beginning. Investment income. Here is where things get really interesting. The church does not just sit on its cash, they invest aggressively, and they have been doing this for decades. The investment returns alone now dwarf the tithing income. Think about that. The church's investment profits in 2023, $24.5 billion, were more than 3 times what they collected in tithing, $6 to $8 billion. This is a wealth-generating machine that feeds itself. Tithing money comes in, gets invested, produces massive returns, and those returns get reinvested. Year after year, decade after decade. Operating businesses. But there is a third layer. The church also owns a vast network of for-profit businesses. These are managed through a holding company called Deseret Management Corporation, or DMC. DMC was established in 1966 and manages a portfolio of for-profit entities that include Bonneville International, a large network of radio stations; Deseret Book, a publishing company with 38 bookstores across the United States; KSL Broadcasting, a major television and radio broadcaster in Utah; Beneficial Financial Group, an insurance, investment, and retirement services company; Deseret News, one of Utah's largest newspapers; Temple Square Hospitality, which manages hotels and hospitality services; Hawaii Reserves Inc. and Zions Securities, real estate and landholding companies. DMC's board of directors is made up of the church's highest leaders, the First Presidency, members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and the presiding bishopric. So the same people making spiritual decisions are also overseeing a global business empire. Chapter 3. The Investment Machine. Ensign Peak Advisors. Now let's talk about the crown jewel of this empire. Ensign Peak Advisors. What is Ensign Peak? Ensign Peak Advisors is the church's investment arm, based in Salt Lake City. It was established to manage the church's investment reserves with a focus on long-term growth, and they have been remarkably successful. As of late 2024, Ensign Peak managed close to $56.3 billion in publicly reported assets, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. The Widow's Mite estimates that Ensign Peak and other third-party funds manage $206 billion in total investments on behalf of the church. What do they invest in? The portfolio holds shares in 1,710 different investments, including stocks, bonds, real estate trusts, index funds, and other equities. They have been heavily invested in big technology stocks. Recently, they held nearly $4 billion in an artificial intelligence giant, likely NVIDIA, which helped push their portfolio to record highs. Since the COVID-19 pandemic low in early 2020, the portfolio has almost doubled in value. It plunged to $29.8 billion in early 2020 during the pandemic crash, then rebounded dramatically. The fund has now grown about 88% in dollar terms since that low point. In a single quarter in 2025, the portfolio added nearly $6 billion in value. That is $6 billion in 3 months, more than many countries spend on their entire military budgets in a year. The Shell Company scheme. Here is where it gets scandalous. For years, Ensign Peak did not report its full portfolio to the SEC. Instead, they created 13 Shell LLCs with names and locations scattered across the United States. Each of these LLCs filed its own reports to the SEC, making the total portfolio appear much smaller than it actually was. According to the SEC, this was a deliberate scheme to evade reporting requirements. The church and Ensign Peak were hiding the true size of their investments, which at the time was around $32 billion. In 2023, the SEC finally caught them. The church agreed to pay a $5 million fine, $4 million from Ensign Peak and $1 million from the church itself. But here is the kicker. That $5 million fine is 50 times larger than any previous 13F-related fine. The SEC order implicated both Ensign Peak and the church's highest leadership, the First Presidency, in an intricate scheme to put institutional interests above compliance with the law. The church's defenders called it a speeding ticket. But critics point out that this was a calculated, decades-long institutional effort to deceive securities regulators and the investing public. Chapter 4. The Real Estate Empire and City Creek Mall. Beyond stocks and bonds, the church owns vast amounts of real estate. The real estate portfolio. The church's real estate holdings are enormous. They own ranches, farms, office buildings, and land across the United States and around the world. The church is reportedly one of the largest private landowners in the United States. They own over 1 million acres of land, including massive cattle ranches in Florida, Utah, and other states. This is managed through various subsidiaries like Property Reserve Inc. and AgReserves. These entities often avoid mentioning the church in their names, making the church's true land holdings difficult to track. City Creek Center. The most famous and controversial real estate project is City Creek Center in Salt Lake City. This is a $1.5 billion shopping mall built directly south of Temple Square, the church's spiritual headquarters. It spans 2 city blocks and features a retractable glass roof, an artificial creek, and fountains that spew fire and water. It is anchored by Nordstrom and Macy's. The church says no tithing funds were used to build the mall. But critics point out that the church used reserve funds, which were originally sourced from tithing. A former member named James Huntsman, son of a billionaire philanthropist and brother of a former Utah governor, sued the church, claiming he was misled about how his $5 million in tithing would be used. The case went all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. In January 2025, an 11-judge panel ruled unanimously in favor of the church. The court said Huntsman had not presented evidence that the church did anything other than what it said it would do. But the controversy continues. Other lawsuits are still working their way through the courts. In one case, plaintiffs are accusing church leaders of fraud and racketeering, claiming they misled members about everything from tithing to the origins of the Book of Mormon. That case may be headed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Chapter 5. The Controversy. Why this matters. So why does all of this matter? Why should we care about a church's bank account? The transparency problem. First, there is the issue of transparency. The church does not publicly disclose its finances. Members donate 10% of their income based on faith and trust. But they do not know exactly where all that money goes. Critics argue that members have a right to know how their sacred tithes are being used. The church's response is that it is a religious organization, not a corporation, and that its finances are a matter between God and his leaders. They also point to their charitable work. The charity question. To be fair, the church does spend money on humanitarian aid. In 2024, they reported spending $1.45 billion on humanitarian aid, welfare, and other relief. But here is the issue. That $1.45 billion is a tiny fraction of their total wealth. Their investment portfolio grew by $28 billion in that same year. They spent $1.45 billion on charity while adding $28 billion to their wealth. That is a ratio that raises questions for many observers. Tax exemptions. The church is tax-exempt. They do not pay property taxes on their churches and temples. Their investment income is not taxed. And because they are a church, they are not required to disclose their finances to the IRS in the same way other nonprofits are. Critics argue that a $293 billion organization should not get a free pass on taxes. The church's defenders argue that religious liberty requires these exemptions, and that the church's good works justify the arrangement. The bigger picture. At the end of the day, the Mormon Church has built something unprecedented in religious history. A $293 billion empire. A $206 billion investment portfolio. Nearly $8 billion in annual tithing income. Profits of $24.5 billion in a single year from investments alone. This is not just a church. This is a global financial powerhouse. And they have done it all while maintaining a shroud of secrecy that would make most corporations blush. Conclusion. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has built a financial empire worth an estimated $293 billion. This wealth comes from three main sources. Tithing from their 17.5 million members, which brings in $6 to $8 billion annually. Investment returns, which generated $24.5 billion in profits in 2023 alone. And a network of for-profit businesses managed through Deseret Management Corporation. The church's investment arm, Ensign Peak Advisors, manages a portfolio of over $56 billion in publicly reported assets, with total investments estimated at $206 billion. They were fined $5 million by the SEC for using shell companies to hide the true size of their portfolio. The church owns vast real estate holdings, including the controversial $1.5 billion City Creek Center Mall. And while they do spend money on charity, $1.45 billion in 2024, that is a fraction of their annual wealth growth. So what do you think? Is this a church that happens to have money? Or is this a financial empire that happens to have a religion? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button, subscribe, and check out our other videos on the history, beliefs, and controversies of the Mormon Church. See you in the next one.